In a gilded suburban ballroom, a financial analyst was about to discover the true cost of marrying into wealth. What started as an elegant charity gala took a shocking turn when she faced calculated social cruelty. Jasmin Rodriguez wasn't your typical gold digger. For 3 years, she had built her career through merit, known for her methodical brilliance and strategic thinking. When she encountered her mother-in-law's public humiliation, she had no idea she was walking into financial warfare. Jasmine's response would lead to acquiring the ultimate weapon, her in-law's mortgage. What began as seeking acceptance would become calculated revenge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the marble floor of the Whitmore Estate's grand ballroom, each shard of light reflecting the careful perfection that Eleanor Whitmore had orchestrated for tonight's charity gala. Jasmin Rodriguez stood at the periphery of the gathering, her fingers wrapped around a champagne flute she hadn't touched, watching the ballet of suburban aristocracy unfold before her. 3 years of marriage to David Whitmore, and she still felt like an actress who'd forgotten her lines in someone else's play. "The dress is stunning on you." Sarah Whitmore appeared at her side, David's younger sister offering one of her rare, genuine smiles. "That blue brings out your eyes." Jasmine glanced down at the midnight blue silk gown, a careful choice that had taken her weeks to select, walking the impossible line between elegant enough for Eleanor's standards and modest enough not to appear flashy. Every decision in this world required such calculations. "Thank you. Your mother certainly knows how to throw an event." Jasmine's voice carried practiced diplomacy, though her eyes tracked Eleanor's movements across the room like a student studying a masterclass in social warfare. Eleanor glided between clusters of guests, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, diamond earrings catching the light as she leaned in to whisper something that made Senator Morrison's wife laugh, the kind of crystalline laughter that sounded expensive. At 62, Eleanor possessed the kind of refined beauty that spoke of decades spent in country clubs and charity boards, every gesture calculated to reinforce her position at the apex of their social hierarchy. "She does love her causes," Sarah murmured, though she sometimes wonders if the cause she's most passionate about is maintaining the natural order of things. Before Jasmine could respond, David materialized beside them, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that should have been comforting but felt performative under her mother's watchful gaze. "Jasmine, darling," Eleanor's voice carried the kind of warmth that never quite reached her eyes. "I've been meaning to introduce you to Patricia Montgomery. She's on the board of the Children's Hospital Foundation." Eleanor's pause was surgical in its precision. "I thought you might have some interesting perspectives on their scholarship program, given your background." The words landed with practiced subtlety. To anyone listening, Eleanor sounded supportive, even thoughtful. But Jasmine heard the real message: you're here because of charity, not because you belong. Patricia Montgomery, a woman whose pearl necklace probably cost more than Jasmine's first car, extended a manicured hand. "How lovely to meet you. Eleanor mentioned you work in finance?" "Financial analysis," Jasmine confirmed, her professional confidence steady, despite the undercurrent of evaluation in her gaze. "How practical." Patricia's smile suggested this was not entirely a compliment. David's grandmother always said the most valuable skill was knowing the difference between necessity and luxury. Eleanor's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Patricia, you're terrible, though I suppose there's wisdom in understanding where one comes from." Her gaze settled on Jasmine with the weight of a judgment already rendered. Background shapes perspective, doesn't it? Jasmine felt David's hand tighten slightly against her back, but when she glanced at him, he was studying his champagne glass as if it contained answers to questions he wasn't brave enough to ask. "I think diverse perspectives strengthen any organization," Jasmine replied evenly, though each word felt like stepping across a minefield. "Oh, absolutely." Eleanor's agreement dripped with false enthusiasm. "Fresh blood can be so invigorating. Though, of course, there's something to be said for understanding the established rhythms of a community before attempting to change them." The conversation continued around her, but Jasmine found herself studying the room with new eyes. The way conversations paused when she approached certain groups. The subtle repositioning that left her standing slightly outside circles of discussion. The polite smiles that never invited deeper engagement. She'd attributed it to normal social adjustment, the natural awkwardness of joining an established community. But watching Eleanor work the room, the way she guided conversations, the meaningful glances she exchanged with other women, the careful modulation of inclusion and exclusion, Jasmine began to recognize the architecture of her isolation. "If you'll excuse me," Jasmine murmured to the group, "I should refresh my drink." As she moved toward the bar, fragments of conversation drifted past her like smoke. Mrs. Hartwell's voice, pitched just loud enough to be overheard. "Such a lovely girl, but one does wonder about the timing." Mrs. Chen's response, equally theatrical in its discretion. "Eleanor handles these situations with such grace." Jasmine's hand steadied on the bar as she ordered a mineral water, her champagne abandoned somewhere between the drawing room and this moment of clarity. Behind her, she could hear Eleanor's voice rising above the gentle murmur of conversation. "The Foundation has always been careful about maintaining certain standards. Not exclusionary, of course, but we found that shared values and backgrounds create the strongest partnerships." Eleanor's laugh carried across the room. "After all, when someone joins a family, any family, there's always a period of adjustment, isn't there? Some people adapt naturally to new circumstances, while others, well, let's just say that authenticity always reveals itself eventually." Jasmine turned slowly, her gaze finding Eleanor across the room. The older woman wasn't looking at her directly, but the positioning was deliberate, close enough to David that he couldn't miss the implications, loud enough that surrounding conversations quieted to listen. "Take David's marriage, for instance," Eleanor continued, her voice warm with maternal affection. "We've all watched him grow into such a thoughtful young man. It's natural for parents to worry about influences that might not have his best interests at heart. Some people marry for love, others for security, and some," another calculated pause, "some for opportunities they couldn't access any other way." The words hung in the air like incense, sweet-smelling but suffocating. Jasmine watched David's face, waiting for the contradiction that never came. Instead, he shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on something fascinating in the middle distance, his silence speaking volumes about loyalties she'd apparently misunderstood. Patricia Montgomery's voice cut through the tension with surgical precision. "Eleanor, you always express things so diplomatically, though I suppose when someone comes from different circumstances, it's natural to wonder about motivations." Jasmine felt the room's attention like a physical weight, dozens of conversations pausing to absorb this moment of theater. She understood now that this wasn't casual cruelty, it was a performance, carefully choreographed to establish boundaries and reinforce hierarchies. Her legs carried her toward the powder room without conscious decision, muscle memory navigating the estate's familiar corridors, while her mind reeled with the implications of what she witnessed. The bathroom door closed behind her with a soft click, and suddenly she was alone with the sound of her own breathing and the terrible clarity of her situation. In the mirror, her reflection stared back. The careful makeup, the expensive dress, the jewelry David had given her for their anniversary, all of it costume, she realized now. All of it part of a role she'd been auditioning for without understanding she was never meant to get the part. Her hands gripped the marble vanity as the last 3 years rearranged themselves in her memory. Every awkward dinner, every social gathering where conversations shifted when she joined them, every moment David had chosen family harmony over defending their relationship, all of it crystallized into a pattern she'd been too hopeful, too trusting to recognize. The door opened behind her, and Sarah's reflection appeared in the mirror, her expression a mixture of guilt and sympathy that somehow made everything worse. "Sarah, Did you know?" The question emerged with surprising steadiness. "Did you know what tonight was really about?"
Sarah's silence was answer enough. Jasmine straightened, smoothing her dress with hands that no longer trembled. When she looked at her reflection now, she saw something different. Not the hopeful woman who'd dressed so carefully for acceptance, but someone harder, more focused. Someone who understood that some wars were fought with smiles and charity galas and carefully chosen words designed to destroy without leaving visible wounds. "Thank you," she said quietly, meeting Sarah's gaze in the mirror. The bathroom door closed behind her as she returned to the gala. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between leaving and returning. The woman who walked back into that glittering ballroom was no longer auditioning for acceptance. She was studying the stage, learning the players, and beginning to understand that sometimes the only way to stop being someone's victim was to become something else entirely. The click of the bathroom door closing behind her still echoed in Jasmine's ears as she moved through the crowd. But now every smile felt like a mask, every conversation a carefully orchestrated performance designed to keep her in her place. The gala continued around her, the same crystalline laughter, the same gentle murmur of polite conversation, but she heard it differently now, like a song played in a minor key. David found her by the French doors leading to the garden, his expression uncertain. "Everything all right? Sarah said you seemed upset."
I'm fine. The lie came easily, though she studied his face for any sign that he'd heard his mother's performance. His blank expression told her everything she needed to know about his selective attention. Good. Mother wants us to join her for dinner Sunday. Just family. He paused, then added with the kind of casual tone that suggested the words had been carefully rehearsed. She mentioned it might be good to discuss some practical matters about our future. Something cold settled in Jasmine's chest. What kind of practical matters? Just financial planning. You know how she worries about. He gestured vaguely, as if the rest of the sentence existed somewhere in the space between them. She wants what's best for everyone. The words hit her like a physical blow. After 3 years of marriage, Eleanor still saw their relationship as something requiring management, protection, careful oversight. And David, her husband, the man who'd promised to build a life with her, was apparently willing to entertain those concerns. I see. Jasmine's voice remained steady even as something fundamental shifted inside her chest, like a foundation settling into new, unstable ground. And what do you think she wants to discuss? David's hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was long enough for Jasmine to understand that this conversation had already happened without her. Just security measures, making sure we're both protected if anything unexpected happens. The euphemism was almost elegant in its cruelty. If anything unexpected happens, as if their marriage were a business venture requiring insurance against fraud. Protected from what, exactly? She kept her voice low, aware of the guests moving around them, but something in her tone made David step back slightly. Jazz, please. It's just paperwork. A formality. A formality. She repeated the words like she was testing their weight. 3 years of marriage and your mother still thinks our relationship needs formalities? The music swelled around them, couples moving onto the dance floor in perfect synchronization, but Jasmine felt frozen in place, watching her marriage dissolve into something transactional, something that required legal protection rather than trust. It's not about us, David said quietly. It's about the family, the business. There are obligations. I understand perfectly. The words came out sharper than she intended, cutting through his explanation like glass. Your obligations are very clear. She turned away from him, away from the gala, away from the life she'd spent 3 years trying to build in a house that had never been meant to be her home. Eleanor's face tonight, beneath the carefully applied makeup and practiced smiles, had carried exactly that kind of fear. the desperate edge of someone protecting something fragile. Jasmin's fingers moved across the keyboard with increasing purpose, following digital breadcrumbs through corporate filings and property records. Each document revealed another layer of financial complexity, another carefully constructed barrier between the Whitmore family's public image and their actual circumstances. By dawn, she had the outline of a very different story than the one Eleanor had been telling. The morning light streaming through Jasmin's apartment windows revealed printouts scattered across her coffee table like pieces of a financial puzzle. Her phone rang at exactly 8 a.m. James, punctual, as always. "Please tell me you didn't spend all night researching ways to destroy your in-laws?" His voice carried the careful tone of someone who already knew the answer. "Only their financial records," Jasmin replied, gathering the documents into neat piles. "Did you know Richard's company has been hemorrhaging money for the past 18 months? A pause. "Jasmin, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking that people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, especially when those houses are mortgaged beyond their actual value." She could hear James's sigh through the phone. "Coffee, now, before you do something that requires me to visit you in prison." An hour later, they sat in their usual corner booth at Meridian Cafe, where James studied her research with the focused intensity of someone reviewing evidence for a case he didn't want to take. "This is thorough," he admitted reluctantly, "and concerning. Richard's company is basically a house of cards at this point." "That's what I thought." Jasmin sipped her coffee, watching James's expression shift from concern to professional assessment. "The question is, what exactly are they so afraid I'll discover? Or what they're afraid you'll take?" James looked up from the documents. "Jez, if David's inheritance is as substantial as these records suggest, and if his parents are as financially vulnerable as this data indicates, then Eleanor is not just protecting her social status, she's protecting her survival." James set down the papers with deliberate care. "You realize what you're contemplating here. This isn't just revenge, this is financial warfare." Before Jasmin could respond, her phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Sarah Whitmore. "Can we meet? There are things you need to know about my family, things David doesn't even know." Jasmin showed James the message, watching his expression darken. "Your sister-in-law wants to meet? Secretly, I'm guessing." "She texted me, not called, and she's using need-to-know language." Jasmin's mind was already racing through possibilities. Sarah's always been the black sheep. Maybe she's tired of protecting family secrets. Or maybe this is exactly what your mother-in-law wants. Think about it. What better way to control the narrative than to have her own daughter feed you information? But even as James spoke, Jasmin was typing her response to Sarah. "When and where?" The reply came within minutes. "Riverside Park, 1 hour. And Jasmin, bring whatever research you've been doing. I think we need to compare notes." James watched her gather the documents with growing alarm. "You're really going to trust her?" "No," Jasmin said, sliding the papers into her bag. "But I'm going to listen to what she has to say. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy makes a very useful ally." "And sometimes," James countered, "they're just another enemy with better information." Riverside Park stretched along the Millfield River like a green ribbon between the working-class neighborhoods where Jasmin had grown up and the manicured estates where she now lived as an unwelcome guest. Sarah sat on a bench overlooking the water, her designer jeans and cashmere sweater incongruous against the backdrop of joggers and dog walkers, people who belonged to Jasmin's world, not the rarefied air of Whitmore society. Sarah said, "You came," without turning around, her voice carrying a weariness that aged her beyond her 28 years old. "You said you had information." Jasmin settled beside her, noting the dark circles under Sarah's eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she lit a cigarette, a habit Eleanor would have forbidden if she'd known about it. "Mother's planning something big for Sunday dinner, more than just a post-nuptial agreement. She's been meeting with lawyers, not just family attorneys, criminal defense lawyers." The words hit me like cold water. "Criminal defense?"
She thinks you're going to try to take David for everything he's worth. She's building a case that you married him under false pretenses, that you've been manipulating his finances from the beginning. The irony is that she's the one who's been manipulating everything for years. Jasmin pulled out her folder of research, spreading Richard's financial documents between them on the bench. Your father's company is essentially bankrupt. The estate is mortgaged beyond its value. Where exactly does Eleanor think David's money is supposed to come from?
$12 million when he turned 30, but Mother convinced him to let Father manage it through the company. Said it would be more tax efficient. She looked up at Jasmin with something approaching admiration. She didn't count on David marrying someone who could actually read financial statements. How much of it is left? Maybe $4 million. Father's been using it to keep the company afloat, thinking he could pay it back before David noticed. Sarah stubbed out her cigarette with more force than necessary. Mother's desperate enough to destroy your marriage to keep that secret buried. Jasmin felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Eleanor's campaign against her wasn't just about social prejudice. It was about financial survival. The family's entire lifestyle depended on access to David's inheritance, and a financially savvy daughter-in-law represented an existential threat to their carefully constructed fraud. There's something else, Sarah continued. Marcus Thompson. He's the mortgage broker who handled all of Father's refinancing. He owes Mother a favor from some social scandal she helped him bury years ago. If you wanted to fight fire with fire... Jasmin's mind was already racing ahead, seeing the elegant symmetry of the solution forming before her. You're suggesting I use their own methods against them? I'm suggesting, Sarah said carefully, that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to become something they're more afraid of than their current victims. The meeting with Marcus Thompson took place in a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city's financial district, where Jasmin had built her career one careful analysis at a time. Now she sat across from a man whose reputation for discretion was matched only by his willingness to bend rules for the right price, or the right leverage. Mrs. Whitmore. Marcus's smile was professionally warm, though his eyes held the calculating look of someone perpetually assessing angles. Sarah mentioned you might be interested in some investment opportunities. I'm interested in acquiring debt, specifically the mortgage on the Whitmore family estate. Marcus's expression didn't change, but she caught the slight pause before they opened the folder, the hesitation of someone suddenly realizing they were in deeper waters than expected. That's an unusual investment strategy, he said carefully, reviewing the financial documents she prepared. May I ask your reasoning? Market diversification. Real estate has always been a stable hedge against volatility. The lie came easily, wrapped in the kind of financial jargon that made questionable decisions sound prudent. The mention of David's inheritance made Marcus lean back slightly. I could see him calculating the commission on a multi-million-dollar transaction versus the implications of facilitating what could only be described as financial warfare within the Whitmore family. Mrs. Whitmore, I should mention that I have existing relationships with your family. There could be conflicts of interest, which is exactly why this arrangement would be mutually beneficial. Discretion is valuable. Loyalty, even more so. That evening, she found David in their shared apartment reviewing architectural plans for a renovation project, the kind of expensive home improvement that assumed unlimited access to family money. He looked up as she entered, his smile warm and uncomplicated in the way that once charmed her, but now seemed willfully naive. How was your day? He asked, the question carrying the casual intimacy of 3 years of marriage. Productive. I've been thinking about what your mother said Sunday about financial planning. She settled beside him on the couch, noting how he tensed slightly at the mention of his mother's concerns. Maybe she has a point about protecting our assets. Really? The relief in his voice was almost painful to hear. I was worried you'd be upset about the whole thing. I think we should be proactive. Take control of our financial future before anyone else tries to. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the weight of deception settle between them like a physical presence.
What would you think about liquidating part of your inheritance for investment purposes? David's arm tightened around her, and for a moment she almost reconsidered the path she was walking. But then she remembered Eleanor's voice at the gala, the careful cruelty of words designed to destroy without leaving fingerprints. "If you think it's the right move," David said quietly, "I trust your judgment completely." The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like the final nail in a coffin she was building for both of them. The Whitmore family dining room had never felt smaller, despite its cathedral ceilings and imported Italian marble. Sunday dinner had always been Eleanor's stage, a weekly performance where family hierarchy was reinforced through seating arrangements, conversation topics, and the subtle choreography of who spoke when. But tonight, Jasmin had her own performance planned. She sat in her usual chair, the one slightly removed from the family cluster, watching Eleanor orchestrate the evening with her characteristic precision. The postnuptial agreement lay on the sideboard like a loaded weapon, its presence acknowledged but not yet addressed. Richard carved the roast with mechanical movements, his hands steady despite the tremor she'd noticed in his voice during their stilted conversation about market conditions. "Jasmin, darling," Eleanor's voice carried its usual crystalline sweetness, "I hope you've had time to consider our conversation about family security. These matters can be so delicate, but they're essential for everyone's peace of mind." David shifted uncomfortably beside her, his fork pushing food around his plate in patterns that suggested his appetite had abandoned him somewhere between the appetizer and this moment. Sarah sat across from them, her expression carefully neutral, though Jasmin caught the almost imperceptible nod that confirmed everything was in place. "Actually, Eleanor," Jasmin's voice carried a calm that surprised even her, "I've been doing quite a bit of thinking about family security lately, financial security specifically." She reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it on the table with the deliberate care of someone setting a chess piece. The weight of it seemed to shift the room's energy, drawing every eye with magnetic force. "I've always believed in taking proactive approaches to financial planning," Jasmin continued, her fingers resting lightly on the envelope. "So I took the liberty of securing some of our family's most valuable assets." Eleanor's smile faltered for the first time in Jasmin's memory, a hairline crack in the porcelain perfection she'd maintained for 3 years. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean, dear." "The estate, Eleanor. This house, specifically." Jasmin opened the envelope with theatrical precision, withdrawing documents that crackled with legal authority. "I've purchased the mortgage. All of it. The primary note, the second mortgage, the line of credit secured against the property value. Everything." The silence that followed was so complete that Jasmin could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time like a countdown. David's fork clattered against his plate, the sound sharp enough to make Sarah flinch. "That's," Richard's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. "That's impossible. The mortgage is held by Meridian Financial Group, which as of Friday afternoon transferred all debt obligations to RJ Holdings LLC, a company I established specifically for this acquisition." She pulled out additional papers, spreading them across the table like tarot cards revealing an unwelcome future. "Would you like to see the transfer documents? They're quite thorough." Eleanor's face had gone ashen, but her voice retained its trained composure. "David, surely you didn't authorize—" "Actually, he did." Jasmin's tone remained conversational, as if discussing weekend plans rather than financial annihilation. "The investment opportunity I presented was quite attractive, a chance to acquire distressed real estate at below market value. David was very supportive of diversifying our portfolio." David's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back from the table, his face cycling through confusion, betrayal, and something approaching horror. "Jasmin, what are you talking about? You said it was commercial property in the business district." "I said it was an undervalued asset with significant emotional attachment for the current occupants." Her gaze moved to Eleanor, noting how the older woman's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Sarah spoke for the first time since dinner began, her voice carefully measured. "How much did it cost?" "The total debt load was approximately $3.2 million. Quite reasonable for a property of the size and location, though significantly more than its current market value. Unfortunately, the housing market in this area has been challenging. Recent comparable sales suggest the property might be worth closer to $2.1 million, assuming you could find a buyer interested in the maintenance costs." Richard's composure finally cracked.
You don't understand the complexity of our financial situation. The company has temporary cash flow issues, but the company is bankrupt, Richard. Has been for 8 months. You've been using David's inheritance to keep up appearances, thinking you could replace it before anyone noticed. The only reason you're not facing fraud charges is because David trusted you with power of attorney over his trust fund. Eleanor rose from her chair with the dignity of someone facing execution, her movement still graceful despite the circumstances. You calculated little bitch. You think you can destroy this family because you're angry about some imagined slights? I think, Jasmin interrupted, standing to meet Eleanor's gaze directly, that people who call others gold diggers shouldn't be stealing from their own children. I think families who claim to value loyalty shouldn't build their security on lies and manipulation. And I think, her voice rose for the first time, carrying 3 years of suppressed rage, that women who make their living humiliating others shouldn't be surprised when someone finally fights back. The dining room fell silent except for the sound of David's chair hitting the floor as he stumbled backward, his face pale with shock and betrayal. When he spoke, his voice was barely recognizable. How could you do this? To my family? To me?
Jasmin looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw not the man she'd fallen in love with, but a frightened boy who'd never learned to distinguish between loyalty and complicity. "I learned from the best teachers," she said quietly. "Your family taught me that love without respect is just another word for exploitation. They taught me that some people only understand power. And they taught me," her gaze moved to Eleanor, who stood frozen in her own ruins, "that sometimes the only way to stop being someone's victim is to become their nightmare instead." The silence that followed Jasmin's revelation stretched like a chasm through the Whitmore dining room, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock and Eleanor's ragged breathing. David stood frozen beside his overturned chair, his face cycling through expressions she'd never seen before, shock giving way to something darker, more final. "Get out." His voice emerged as barely more than a whisper, but the words carried the weight of 3 years crumbling into dust. "Get out of this house. Get out of our lives." Jasmin had expected anger, had prepared for accusations and threats, but the quiet devastation in David's voice, the sound of trust dying in real time, hit her with unexpected force. She'd won, but victory tasted like ashes in her mouth. "David, if you would just listen." "Listen to what?" He turned to face her fully, and she saw her own calculations reflected back in his eyes, the recognition that she had played him as expertly as his mother had played her social victims. "Listen to how you used my love for you to destroy my family? How you turned me into a weapon against the people who raised me?" Eleanor moved to her son's side with surprising grace for someone whose world had just collapsed, her maternal instincts overriding even financial ruin. "David, darling, we can fix this. There are legal options, ways to challenge." "With what money, Mother? With what credibility?" "She's right about everything, isn't she? About Father's company, about my inheritance, about all of it." Richard slumped in his chair as if the weight of his deceptions had finally become too much to bear upright. "Son, I never meant for things to go this far. The investments seemed sound. The projections showed—" "Stop." David's voice cut through his father's explanations like a blade. "Just stop. All of you." His gaze moved between his parents and his wife, former wife, Jasmin realized with sudden clarity, as if seeing strangers wearing familiar faces. "I don't want to hear justifications from any of you. I don't want to hear how everyone was protecting me or acting in my best interests while lying to my face." Sarah spoke from her corner of the wreckage, her voice barely audible. "David, I tried to warn you. You knew. You all knew, and you all decided what I could handle, what I should know, what kind of man I was allowed to be. My laugh carried no humor. Maybe Jasmin's right. Maybe I never grew up because none of you ever let me." Jasmin gathered her documents with hands that had begun to shake, the papers rustling like autumn leaves in the sudden quiet. She imagined this moment would feel like justice, like the restoration of dignity stolen at charity galas and family dinners. Instead, it felt like standing in the ruins of something that had once been beautiful, even if it had been built on lies. "The house is yours for now," she said quietly, addressing the room rather than any individual. "I'm not interested in displacement. But the financial deception ends today. All of it." She walked toward the door, leaving behind 3 years of marriage and the family she'd never quite belonged to, carrying only the hollow satisfaction of having proven that she was exactly as dangerous as they'd always feared she might be. 3 weeks after the dinner that destroyed everything, Jasmin sat in her mother's small kitchen, watching Carmen Rodriguez knead bread with the same methodical precision she'd applied to every task since immigrating 40 years ago. The familiar rhythm of flour and water transforming into something nourishing felt like a meditation after the chaos of recent events. "You got what you wanted," Carmen said without looking up from her work, her accented English carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "So why do you look like someone who lost everything?" Jasmin stared into her coffee cup, seeing her reflection fractured in the dark liquid. "Because maybe I did lose everything. David won't speak to me. James thinks I've crossed some moral line. Even Sarah has gone silent. And the house? The money? The power over these people who hurt you? It's all there. All mine. But every time I think about what I've done, I feel empty. Like I won a game I never really wanted to play." Carmen shaped the dough with firm, practiced movements, her hands telling stories of decades spent working to give her daughter opportunities she never had. "When I first came to this country, I cleaned houses for rich families. Beautiful houses, like the one that your husband grew up in. You know what I learned? I learned that money doesn't make people happy or good or worthy of respect. It just makes them powerful. And power—" Carmen paused, flour dusting her hands like snow. "Power shows you who people really are, including yourself." The words hit harder than Jasmin expected. She told herself that acquiring the Whitmore mortgage was about justice, about refusing to be diminished by people who'd never earned their superiority. But sitting in her mother's kitchen, surrounded by the simple dignity of honest work and genuine love, she couldn't escape the truth that Carmen was gently offering her. "I became exactly what they said I was. Someone who married for money. Someone who used David to get what I wanted." "No, mija." Carmen's voice was firm, but not unkind. "You became someone who forgot that there is a difference between refusing to be a victim and becoming the person who creates victims." Before Jasmin could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Turn on Channel 7 now." The television in Carmen's living room flickered to life, revealing a familiar figure standing behind a podium. Eleanor Whitmore, perfectly composed despite her circumstances, faced a crowd of reporters with the dignity of someone who'd spent decades managing public perception. "The Whitmore Family Foundation has made the difficult decision to dissolve our operations." Eleanor's voice carried its familiar authority, though Jasmin caught the tremor underneath. "Recent financial challenges have made it impossible to continue our charitable work at the level our community deserves." The reporter's question was barely audible, but Eleanor's response cut through the noise. "We take full responsibility for mismanaging funds that should have been protected. Our son's trust was used inappropriately to cover business losses, and we understand that there will be legal consequences for our actions." Jasmin stared at the screen, watching Eleanor publicly confess to financial impropriety with the same grace she'd once used to humiliate others. The admission would destroy what remained of the family's social standing, but it also carried an unexpected dignity. The dignity of someone choosing truth over continued deception. "She's protecting her son," Carmen observed quietly, "taking the blame so he can start over without carrying their mistakes." The broadcast cut to footage of Richard Whitmore being led away in handcuffs, his business empire officially dissolved. Sarah appeared briefly, declining to comment but looking older, wearier.
as if the weight of family secrets had finally become visible. They're taking responsibility for what they did, Jasmin said, more to herself than to her mother. While I'm sitting here with their house and their debt, having learned nothing except how to be as ruthless as they were. Carmen turned off the television and returned to her bread, the silence stretching between them like a bridge Jasmin wasn't sure she was ready to cross. "It's not too late to choose who you want to be," Carmen said finally, "but only if you're willing to give up being right long enough to start being good." 6 months later, Jasmin stood in the same conference room where she'd first met Marcus Thompson, but this time the paper spread across the polished table told a different story. Instead of acquisition documents, she reviewed transfer agreements that would return the Whitmore estate mortgage to the family, not as a gesture of defeat, but as something harder to define and infinitely more valuable. "Are you certain about this?" Marcus asked, his professional composure unable to mask his confusion. "The property has actually appreciated since the market correction. You're walking away from a significant profit." "I'm walking towards something more important than profit," Jasmin replied, signing the final document with steady hands. "Sometimes the most valuable thing you can own is the ability to let go." The meeting concluded with handshakes that felt more like absolution than business transaction. As she left the building, Jasmin's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "David knows what you're doing. He wants to see you." An hour later, she sat across from her estranged husband in the same riverside park where she'd first conspired with Sarah. David looked different, older, more serious, with the kind of gravity that came from having illusions stripped away and choosing to build something real from what remained. "I heard about the mortgage transfer," he said without preamble. "Sarah said you're not asking for anything in return." "There's nothing I want from your family anymore." The words were true in ways that surprised her. "I got what I thought I needed, and it turned out to be exactly as empty as everyone warned me it would be." David was quiet for a long moment, watching joggers pass on the riverside path. "You know, the strangest part isn't that you destroyed us, it's that you probably saved us. If you hadn't exposed everything, Father would have kept stealing from my inheritance until there was nothing left. Mother would have kept building her social empire on lies until it collapsed on its own. That wasn't my intention."
I know, your intention was revenge. But sometimes the consequences of our actions are better than our motivations. He turned to face her directly. "Eleanor is in therapy now, actually talking about her childhood, her insecurities, why she felt the need to tear other people down to feel secure. Father's working as a financial consultant. Honest work, for honest pay. And me?" He paused, a smile playing at the edges of his expression. "I'm learning to be the kind of man who doesn't need other people to fight his battles for him." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past, carrying leaves and debris towards some distant destination. Jasmin thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, brilliant, wounded, determined to never again be powerless in the face of cruelty. That woman had achieved everything she'd set out to accomplish, but somehow the victory had transformed into something else entirely. "I've been thinking about what you said that night, about love without respect being exploitation. You were right. I spent 3 years asking you to accept disrespect because it was easier than confronting my family's behavior. That wasn't love, it was cowardice. And I spent 3 years building a case against all of you instead of having honest conversations about what I needed. I was so focused on being right that I forgot how to be good. My mother wants to apologize to you. Properly, I mean. Not the performative kind she used to specialize in, but the real thing. She's been working with her therapist on understanding why she felt so threatened by you." The idea of facing Eleanor again sent familiar anxiety coursing through Jasmin's chest, but underneath it was something unexpected. Curiosity about who the woman might be when stripped of her social armor. "Would you be there?" she asked. "Only if you want me to be. This isn't about me or our marriage or what we used to be. It's about two people who hurt each other trying to find a way to stop the cycle. That evening, Jasmin found herself back in the Whittemore estate for the first time since the disastrous dinner that had changed everything. The house felt different, smaller somehow, less imposing. Eleanor met her at the door, and Jasmin was struck by how much the older woman had changed. Gone was the perfectly coiffed armor as social superiority, replaced by something more human, more vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, her voice carrying none of its former crystalline sharpness. "I wasn't sure you would." They sat in the living room, where Jasmin had spent countless uncomfortable holiday gatherings, but the space felt transformed by honesty. Eleanor's hands shook slightly as she poured tea, a nervous gesture that humanized her in ways Jasmin had never expected. "I owe you an apology that's 6 months overdue," Eleanor began, her words careful but sincere. "What I did to you, the way I treated you, the things I said, none of it was about you. It was about my own fear of losing control, my own insecurity about my place in this family, this community. I married into wealth myself. I spent 40 years building an identity around being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the guardian of family reputation. When David brought you home, brilliant, independent, unimpressed by the things I'd built my life around, I saw everything I'd convinced myself was valuable being questioned by your very existence." Jasmin listened without interrupting, recognizing the courage it took for Eleanor to dismantle the carefully constructed image she'd maintained for decades. "I told myself I was protecting David, protecting the family, but really, I was protecting my own sense of worth, and in doing so, I tried to destroy yours." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. "I'm sorry, Jasmin. For the gala, for the dinner, for every moment I made you feel like you didn't belong. You belonged, more than any of us. You were the only one telling the truth." The apology hung between them, raw and imperfect, but genuine, in ways that Eleanor's previous performances never had been. Jasmin felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. "I'm sorry too," Jasmin said quietly, "for using your son's love as a weapon, for taking my anger at you and turning it into something that hurt everyone, including innocent people. I became exactly what you accused me of being, someone who used your family for my own purposes." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "No, you became someone who refused to be victimized. I just wish—" She paused, seeming to gather courage. "I wish I'd been strong enough to see your strength as something to celebrate rather than something to fear." They talked until the sun set behind the estate's manicured gardens. Two women who'd wounded each other deeply, finding their way towards something that wasn't quite friendship, but was perhaps more valuable. Mutual understanding born from shared recognition of their own capacity for both cruelty and growth. As Jasmin prepared to leave, Eleanor handed her a small wrapped package. Inside was a framed photograph from David and Jasmin's wedding day, a moment of genuine joy that had been buried under years of family dysfunction.
"I want you to know," Eleanor said softly, "that there were moments when I saw how much you loved him, how much he loved you. I let my fear destroy something beautiful, but it was beautiful. Whatever happens next, that was real." Driving home through streets that no longer felt like enemy territory, Jasmin reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from victim to victor to something more complex, a woman who'd learned that true strength lay not in domination, but in the courage to choose grace when vengeance would be easier. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How did it go, mija?" She typed back, "Like learning to breathe again, like remembering who I wanted to be before I got so focused on who I was fighting." 6 months ago, she'd stood in a bathroom at a charity gala, watching her reflection transform from hopeful wife to calculating adversary. Tonight, looking at herself in her rearview mirror, she saw someone different entirely.
A woman who discovered that the most radical act wasn't revenge, but the decision to break cycles of hurt rather than perpetuate them. The future stretched ahead like an unwritten story, and for the first time in months, Jasmin was curious, rather than angry, about how it might end. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.